My dear friends, there is a peculiar stillness that often precedes the work of God. It is not unlike the moment before a symphony begins, when the conductor lifts his hand and all instruments, however disparate, fall into a quiet that is more profound than silence itself. It is this sacred hush that we misinterpret most often. We say, God is absent, when in truth he is merely drawing breath. Worry, for all its intensity, is nothing more than a shadow, long and looming, but without substance. It masquerades as wisdom, dressing itself in the language of preparation and caution. We tell ourselves that we're simply thinking ahead, being careful, or weighing our options, but at its core, worry is a false prophet. It speaks of futures it cannot know, declares outcomes it cannot control, and pulls our attention away from the presence of God toward a fog that hasn't even formed yet. And what is most tragic is that it is so convincing. Worry rarely announces itself as fear. Instead, it whispers in our minds like an advisor, suggesting we must stay up late thinking, planning, bracing, just in case. But if we look closer, we see that what we call preparation is often anxiety in disguise, and what we think is foresight is really a lack of trust. God never once commanded us to worry. In fact, His word is filled with exhortations to do the opposite. Do not worry about tomorrow, Jesus said, for tomorrow will worry about itself. He wasn't offering an abstract comfort, He was revealing a truth about how divine timing works. Worry attempts to occupy a space in time where we were never meant to live. God gives grace for today, not for the tomorrows we invent in our minds. When we step outside that provision by obsessing over the unknown, we end up exhausted, confused, and spiritually numb. It's important to realize that worry and faith cannot coexist in the same breath. They both demand your attention, but they lead in opposite directions. Faith invites you to walk into the unknown with confidence because it anchors you in God's character. Worry invites you to circle the unknown like a prisoner who cannot leave their cell, rehearsing every possible negative outcome. The difference lies in the source. Faith draws its strength from what God has done and what He has promised. Worry draws its power from speculation and worst case scenarios. There is a strange irony to worry. It promises to protect us, yet it leaves us more vulnerable. We think that by worrying, we are somehow insulating ourselves from disaster. But in truth, worry drains our spiritual energy and blinds us to the actual voice of God. When you are consumed with fear about the future, you become deaf to what God is saying in the present. The enemy knows this. Worry is one of his most effective tools, not because it changes reality, but because it changes our asterisk perception of reality. It distorts how we see God, how we see ourselves, and how we interpret what's happening around us. When God is about to shift everything in your life, the enemy often attempts to stir up worry to confuse you. He wants you to believe that the inner trembling you feel is a signal of danger rather than a sign of destiny. But what if the tightness in your chest isn't fear at all? What if it's spiritual stretching? What if the uneasiness isn't a warning, but an invitation to lean in and trust? God does not use worry to guide His people. He uses peace. He uses conviction. He uses clarity, even in the midst of storms. And often, when everything is about to change, God first calls us to let go of our obsession with knowing every detail. He calls us to trust, not because the future is simple, but because He is sovereign. Worry, then, becomes not only unnecessary but spiritually dangerous. It robs us of joy, distorts our discernment, and subtly places ourselves, not God, at the center of the story. So when worry begins to rise, do not honor it with attention. Instead, return to what you know. God is good, His timing is perfect, and His plans are always for your good and His glory. Let that truth be your compass when your feelings try to take the lead. When God prepares to shift the circumstances of your life, He rarely begins with the external. Instead, he starts within. We expect change to arrive with obvious signs: a job offer, a closed door, a relationship ending, a miraculous provision. But in truth, the earliest and most telling evidence of divine movement is far quieter and subtler. A restlessness in the soul, a discontent with what once satisfied, a tug towards something not yet seen. This sacred disturbance is not a flaw in your spiritual walk. It is often the first whisper that God is calling you to more. Before he moves around you, he moves within you, adjusting your desires, questioning your comfort, and stirring up the courage to let go. It is important to understand that God is not in the business of keeping us comfortable. He is in the business of growing us into Christ-likeness. That means that before he ever opens a new door, he often leads us to confront the walls we've built inside ourselves. Sometimes this comes as a loss of peace with things that once brought joy. Other times, it's a deep sense that where we are is no longer where we're supposed to stay. We may not know the next step, but we feel that staying put is no longer an option. This discomfort is not to be feared. It is to be listened to. It is the soul's early warning system that the divine winds are shifting. Many of us mistake this feeling for failure. We assume we've done something wrong because we no longer feel fulfilled in a place or position where we once thrived. But spiritual restlessness is often not the sign of decline. It's the seed of elevation. God shakes our spirit not to crush us, but to awaken us. The feeling of agitation is not always the enemy's attack. Often, it is God's way of making sure we don't get too settled in a temporary place. The Israelites felt it in Egypt before they ever heard Moses speak. Abraham must have felt it in Ur before God ever called him to leave. And Christ himself, before his public ministry began, was driven into the wilderness, not as a punishment, but as preparation. So too, when your spirit begins to churn, it may be that heaven is getting ready to speak. We must train ourselves to discern between anxiety and divine prompting. Anxiety speaks in confusion and fear, pushing us to make frantic moves. Divine prompting speaks with clarity and conviction, drawing us gently but persistently toward change. One will lead you into chaos, the other will lead you into purpose. The challenge is that both can feel equally urgent. That's why stillness is essential. In the quiet, we begin to sense the difference between mere noise and God's true voice. This inner movement is a mercy. Imagine if God only spoke through external circumstances. How easily we would miss his voice or misinterpret his timing. Instead, he plants his whispers within us so that even before the doors open or close, we can sense his nearness and his guidance. The soul's restlessness is often the preparation phase of divine redirection. It's his way of giving us a head start, so that when the visible shift arrives, our hearts are already halfway there. So when you feel that divine tension rising, not panic, but a steady awareness that things are about to change, don't resist it. Don't numb it with distraction or dismiss it. As overthinking, lean in, pray, wait, let the restlessness speak. Let it shape your prayers and reorient your focus. Because when God is about to shift everything, he does not shout from the clouds. He starts by knocking quietly on the doors of your heart. And blessed are those who open. Discomfort is often misunderstood in the spiritual journey. We tend to associate it with something negative, punishment, failure, abandonment. But when God is about to transform your life, one of the first things he allows is a sacred discomfort. This unease is not accidental. It is not the same as fear, though it can feel like fear at first. It is not depression, though it may carry a weight. It is not confusion, though it unsettles the certainty you once had. This kind of discomfort is holy. It is a signal that you have outgrown your current situation, even if you cannot yet see what is coming next. It is God's way of pulling your soul out of complacency and pointing it towards something greater. We serve a God who does not leave us where we are. He is always drawing us higher, deeper, closer. But spiritual growth almost never happens in the comfortable. In fact, comfort is often the enemy of calling. When we become too at home in a temporary place, we forget that we were made for movement, for growth, for transformation. So, in His mercy, God begins to disrupt what once seemed peaceful. The things that once satisfied you now feel shallow. The work that once fulfilled you now feels empty. The routine that once provided stability now feels suffocating. You begin to feel as if something is off even though, on the outside, nothing has changed. This sacred discomfort is not meant to break you. It is meant to awaken you. It is God's way of saying, "Look up. I'm doing something new." It is a divine invitation to prepare, to listen, and to trust. And though it can be painful, it is always purposeful. God does not disturb your soul without intention. He is not cruel or careless. When He begins to stir the waters of your spirit, it is because He is about to move. The storm that brews inside is the first sign that change is on the horizon. But here is where the challenge lies. We often misinterpret this discomfort. We think we've done something wrong. We try to fix it, control it, or silence it. We pray for peace, not realizing that the lack of peace is the answer to our prayer. It is God saying, "You're not supposed to stay here." And yet, we resist. We cling to what is familiar. We argue with what we feel. We ask for clarity while trying to avoid obedience. But God, in His love, does not remove the discomfort. He lets it remain until we're willing to follow. This stage of sacred discomfort is also a refining season. It reveals what we truly trust. Do we trust God's voice more than our comfort? Do we trust His timing more than our plans? Do we trust His direction even when we do not yet see the destination? These are the questions that discomfort brings to the surface. And if we are honest, they expose our attachments, not just to circumstances, but to control, to self, reliance, and to our own understanding of what life should look like. The good news is this: God never stirs what He will not also settle. The same God who allows the tension is the one who will bring peace on the other side of obedience. But He will not bypass this inner process. He knows that what He's preparing for you externally must match who you are becoming internally. And that transformation starts with this discomfort. It is not a sign that you are lost. It is a sign that you are being led. So do not rush through this season. Do not numb the restlessness or bury it under distraction. Sit with it, pray through it, let it do its holy work, because the very discomfort that frustrates you today may be the exact signal that God is shifting everything around you for tomorrow. We often say that God's timing surprises us, as if He operates on an unpredictable schedule. From our limited view, His shifts feel sudden. One moment everything is stable, and the next everything is turned upside down. But the truth is, nothing God does is ever rushed or random. What feels sudden to us has been in motion long before we ever saw a sign. God's shifts are not sudden to Him. They are the unfolding of plans laid from eternity. He is never caught off guard. He is never improvising. Every change is deliberate, every redirection part of a greater tapestry we can't yet see. We live in time, but God exists outside of it. That means what we call delay, He calls preparation. What we call silence, He calls working behind the scenes. While we are focused on the visible, God is busy in the invisible, shaping hearts, orchestrating details, aligning moments. And when it's time, the shift comes. It may appear to happen all at once, but it's simply the visible manifestation of something long in the making. Like a tree that breaks through the soil after months of silent growth underground. God's plans reach the surface only when they've been fully formed in the hidden place. This truth is both comforting and convicting. Comforting because it means we're never waiting in vain. Convicting because it means we must stop measuring God's activity by what we can see. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean He isn't moving. Just because you don't hear an answer doesn't mean He hasn't already spoken it into existence. Our role is not to figure out the timeline. Our role is to remain faithful, even when we feel forgotten. One of the most subtle traps we fall into is believing that we must prepare for divine shifts by controlling outcomes. We try to manage results, rush seasons, or demand clarity. But when God is orchestrating a shift, He rarely gives us the full blueprint in advance. That's because the process is as important as the destination. The waiting, the stillness, the not knowing, these refine our faith. They strip away our illusions of control and teach us to lean into trust. The apparent delay is often where the deepest transformation happens. It's in these moments of quiet that God is preparing not just what He will do, but who we must become in order to receive it. If the blessing came too soon, it might break us. If the door opened too early, we might not recognize what it requires. God, in His wisdom, doesn't just give us what we want when we want it. He gives us what we're ready for, when we're ready for it. So when the shift finally comes, when the breakthrough arrives, the door opens, the path clears. It will seem sudden, but it isn't. It's simply right on time. You may look back and say, "How did this happen so fast?" But in truth, it didn't. It was growing quietly, patiently, under God's watchful eye. You were not forgotten. You were being shaped. This understanding changes how we wait. Instead of resenting the stillness, we begin to respect it. Instead of doubting the process, we begin to see purpose in it. And instead of panicking when change feels abrupt, we begin to trust that it has arrived precisely when God intended. His shifts are sudden only to those who weren't listening. But to those who have walked with Him in the quiet, they arrive with confirmation, not confusion. Let this truth calm your heart. God is not late. He is not uncertain. He is not reactive. He is preparing. And when the time is right, what seemed impossible will unfold effortlessly, not because it came quickly, but because it came divinely, perfectly, and right on time. There comes a time in every believer's journey when the things that once felt safe, stable, and familiar begin to shift. What you used to rely on no longer holds. What once brought clarity now brings confusion. The roles you played, the people you leaned on, the rhythms you followed, suddenly they don't fit the same way. And in this disorienting space, it's easy to panic. But what if this crumbling of the familiar is not the end of stability, but the beginning of something holy? What if it's the hand of God, removing what you've outgrown so that faith can finally rise to the surface? When God begins to shift everything, He often starts by disrupting what we've come to depend on more than Him. That may sound harsh, but it is an act of deep love. He knows that comfort can become a prison. He knows that our trust can silently drift toward people, routines, and even ministries that were never meant to carry the weight of our hope. So He begins to shake what can be shaken, not to harm us, but to remind us where our true foundation lies. When the familiar fails, it's not because God has abandoned you. It's because He's calling you higher. Faith isn't truly tested in the presence of certainty. It's tested when the lights go out, when the answers don't come, when the old systems no longer produce results. That's where faith is refined, not as a concept, but as a lifeline. In these moments, we're faced with a choice: cling to the fading or step into the forming, cling to what used to be, or follow the whisper of God into what is yet to come. And the whisper is rarely loud. It doesn't always come with instructions. Often it's a sense, a deep inner knowing that God is calling you out of the boat, asking you to walk on the water toward Him, even when the storm hasn't stopped. The danger is in holding on too tightly to what's ending. When we try to preserve what God is trying to replace, we miss the opportunity for transformation. And yet, letting go is not easy. It feels like loss, like failure, like grief. But in God's economy, surrender is never wasted. When you release the familiar, you make space for the miraculous. You clear room for the new thing God is trying to birth. And though it's uncomfortable, it's the only way to move forward with Him. Sometimes the disruption comes in relationships. People who once walked closely with you now feel distant, or conversations that used to flow become strained. Other times, it's internal. You feel a longing for something more, but you can't yet name it. You begin to realize that the place you've been was only meant to carry you for a season, not for a lifetime. And even though the path ahead looks unclear, your heart knows it's time. This is where courage must rise. Not the courage to control, but the courage to release. Not the courage to fix what's breaking, but to bless it as it leaves. Because sometimes the fall of the familiar is the very thing that makes room for a deeper faith. A faith that walks by trust, not sight. A faith that listens more than it explains. A faith that obeys even when the outcome is uncertain. God's shifts are not always neat, but they are always necessary. He's not trying to destroy your life. He's preparing you to live it more fully. The old ways, the old support systems, even the old identity. They were good, but they were never meant to be forever. So when the familiar begins to fail, don't despair. Stand still, breathe deep, and let faith rise. Because what looks like falling apart is often the very beginning of falling into place.